that probably I've gotten away. But you never know. They might have caught me. I've had to leave. That's why, unfortunately, we have to do this on video. Otherwise, I'd be there with you to tell you this stuff. But I've had to go. I'll tell you in a minute where I'm going, if I can get out of here in time. But before then, I really want to sit down and tell you some of this stuff before I take off, just so that you make sure that you know it. It's all there for you. Really, they don't want you to know all this stuff. Who are they? I don't know who they are. But they don't want you to know this stuff. The question they don't want you to ask, why are we studying Shakespeare? Why are we reading this play called Macbeth? And next week, or week 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks from now, Romeo and Juliet. Why are we reading these? Why are we doing this? They don't want you to ask that question, but I do. Okay, I want to point out something to you, just to start with. This is a very big book, and you don't have to read it. You only have to read a couple plays of it. What is it? Oh, they're after me. It's the complete works of Shakespeare. Oh, it's backwards, isn't it? Is that better? Good, that's better. You don't have to read all of it. But I want to tell you, this book and the works in it have had more effect on the English language than any other book in the history of the English language. This is the most important literary contribution to the language of English ever. The only other thing that's even close is the King James Bible. Now this, Shakespeare, was written 400 years ago. Most of his plays were written right around the beginning of the 17th century, 1600, right? So the play you're going to look at first, which is Macbeth, was written about 1605, more than 400 years ago. So why is it that we're still studying and still reading Shakespeare, even though he's 400 years old? Well, there's a couple of good reasons for that. One is the mystery around Shakespeare. It's a really interesting story about Shakespeare himself. We're going to take a little bit of a look at who he is and why it is that there's a little bit of a question about whether or not this guy on the cover, they're pretty sure that's William Shakespeare. Did he really write this stuff? And there's a little bit of an argument about it. Let's dig into that a little bit. The thing about Shakespeare is very little is known about his real life. If you look, for example, at the records about Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote the Canterbury Tales, there is all sorts of extracurricular information about him. Things that are written down in court records, in county records, things of him buying a piece of property, him selling this other thing. He's around in other documentation. But Shakespeare, there's very little about him. What we do know about him was that he was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, a little town sort of northwest of London. You know, nowadays it's about a 2-hour car ride from London. Back in the day, it was probably more like a 2-day journey, maybe 3, depending on how fast your horse was. So he was out in the boonies compared to the city of London. But he was born there around 1564, so say my notes. And they're not exactly sure because there's no record of his birth exactly. But he was born to a guy who was a tanner and also the mayor of Stratford-upon-Avon. Now, back in those days, a tanner was not somebody who laid in a tanning booth and got a nice tan. A tanner was someone who took leather and made it into nice tan leather that you could use to make gloves and other things like that. And he was supposedly the glove maker of the town of Stratford-upon-Avon. William, his son, was born to him around 1564. We don't have much records about his early life. In fact, really the only first record we have of him was that he was married in about 1582 when he was 18. So Shakespeare, as far as we know, lived a fairly quiet life as a little boy and got married at the age of 18 in Stratford-upon-Avon to a woman who was 26 years old, whose name was Anne Hathaway. Not the famous actress, she's much younger than that. This is the first Anne Hathaway, or at least the first famous one. And he married her, she was 26 years old, and there's even a little bit of scandal at the very beginning because they had their first baby 6 months after they were married. So that's one of the first public records we have of William Shakespeare. So he, very quiet life. He probably went to Stratford Grammar School. I went to Stratford High School, which makes me a famous playwright. He went to Stratford Grammar School, which probably got him equivalent of elementary school, maybe junior high school level education today.